Ewans need to get in here. Some of them are for up north, so. Got to speak their language. All y'all. All right. Did everyone get a copy of the PDI? So, before we start counseling, I'm not talking about with every church member I give counsel to. Remember, I distinguish between giving counsel to a church member and doing counseling. Before I start counseling, meaning more extensive, protracted meetings about a particular topic, I have them fill this out. And yes, even church members, because I need to know background and details about some things. Now, there's an older PDI that's in this book, and you can look at that, just the difference between that one and this one. This is a modification. And I'm going to tell you why I've modified it. I can read the old PDI, and I know exactly where to start because I've been doing it for 20-some years. But I have found that folks that are new to counseling struggle to read the old PDI because part of the intention of the old PDI was never to really ask very direct questions. It was to have to, they had to answer things several different ways at different places, and it wasn't back to back. And there were ways that you looked at it and that you gleaned through similarities and factors there. And I've just found that not everyone gets the nuance of it, all right? And so it's just a little more complicated. So this PDI is way more just straightforward. And I'm just going to be honest with you, I have found culturally, our culture has changed probably significantly since the time that PDI was written, so that people are just much more blunt and straightforward. And there was a time when you were doing counseling, people almost didn't want to tell you what problems they had, and you had to kind of draw it out. And now you almost don't want to go to Walmart because everyone's going to tell you every problem they have, And so it just is a different time, and so I modified the PDI. And so this is it'll be easier for most people to read, and easier to get to the issues that we need to deal with, okay? So this starts off with, on the first page there, it starts off with their personal information, just getting a sense, church affiliation. I never counsel, and I will tell you, please do obey or follow biblical principles regarding authority. Don't counsel people that you don't have authority to counsel. And what I mean by authority to counsel, if they're a member of another church, meaning another independent Baptist church, Bible-believing church. I would even go as far as a Southern Baptist church, okay, church that teaches the gospel. Now, I'm not talking about people that are Mormons and Catholics, and these churches don't teach the gospel, okay? But if they're a member of a gospel-preaching church, even if they're not a church you agree with about everything, make sure you have their pastor's permission to counsel, okay? Because you want the right authority. Satan loves when we mess around with authority. So make sure you have the right authority. We'll talk more about authority later, but church affiliation. I always ask them, if they're not a member of my church, do you have permission from your pastor to get counseling? Okay. And then what's their marital status? Are they married, single, the name of their spouse, how long did they know each other, when were they married, those type of things. This matters mostly if you're dealing with marriage counseling. If there's been separation, what's the state of their marriage? And you just kind of want to be able to glean that information. Children, are these by this marriage or a previous marriage? And sometimes you might look here and you might see, they've got a child, they're 12 years old, but they've only been married for 7 years, right? So this was a child. Is this both of your children? You're both the parents, okay. So now I know that they were involved with each other before marriage. That's going to impact some things in their relationship, obviously. And so there's things there that you'll just kind of glean. And we're looking for things that spark questions. And we're going to talk a lot more about questions in the next day, okay. But how to ask questions. But we're looking for places that we go, okay, what about this and how about that and these type of things. And I'm going to talk to you about how to ask questions and so forth. But we're looking for things that stand out, that catch our attention, that we need to ask about. Family history. Briefly explain your parents' Christian experience. Were they believers? Would you say your parents were consistent in public and in private and how they acted and treated you? Did you feel accepted by your father? This is a huge, huge question because a person's concept of God comes from their dad, right? We're not going to get into that right here, but that is dealt with in other classes that we have for the counseling training, okay? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most, how close would you say you are to your father? If that number is 0 on a scale of 1 to 10, you know there's a problem. All right. Now, the only exception would be if they put my dad's deceased. Right? I don't have a relationship with him anymore. But if he's alive, and that's a low number, and so they're going to give 3 words that describe your father. Abusive, angry, whatnot. There's going to be a tendency for them to have the same view of God many times. So you need to see that. Then did you feel accepted by your mother? If no, same questions, but about the mom. Say, well, what's the point of that? Well, your view of the church largely comes from your mother. That's Ephesians chapter number 5. Dad represents Christ and mom represents the church. And there's a whole lot there we're not going to get into here, but just concept-wise, I don't like my church. There's not enough entertainment. There's not enough activity. They're too focused on God and not on people and so forth. That has to do with how mom was. Okay, just concepts there. Are you adopted? If yes, please share what you know. Adopted children, it's a wonderful thing when people are adopted. All right, so I don't want to imply any differently, but I will tell you, most adopted people struggle with a lot of emotional turmoil. So knowing that will help you to be able to identify maybe a source there to begin to talk about it. Are your parents presently married or divorced? Was there a sense of harmony in your home? Was your father clearly the head of the home? How did your father treat your mother? Were you raised by someone other than your parents? Have there been any deaths of close family members in the past year? And if so, please explain. By the way, if someone comes in and they're depressed and they don't know why, I'm struggling with depression, I don't know why, and there was a death of a family member within the last year, you might want to check that out. Yep. All right? Depression is a grief response. Okay, it's part of the grief response. And yet people often don't connect it because they're like, well, that was months ago. Why would it be bothering me now? It can take a while for things to kick in after the death of a close loved one. And so it's a process, and it can, people sometimes just don't even connect those things together. All right? Rate your health. Any recent weight changes, important past illnesses. Recent weight changes, we're really looking for stuff that's kind of more dramatic because especially if they all of a sudden they're just having lots of emotional issues and they've gained a lot of weight, it could be a thyroid issue, right? And you can't counsel away thyroid issues. Or they're having a lot of emotional problems and they've lost a lot of weight. It could be cancer. And they just haven't been to the doctor, and you can't counsel away cancer. All right, and there's physical issues that have to be dealt with physical ways. Okay, and so you're looking for things that stand out in this regard, right? And I'm not saying everyone that's gained weight or lost weight has. I'm just saying if it's been dramatic and sudden, and they don't have an explanation for it, that's something you might go, okay, we need to get you to the doctor and check out whether you're healthy or not. Are you taking medications? A lot of issues that we deal with are, in our day, right now, treatment engendered, meaning they're caused because of medication they're taking. And they're like, I'm depressed and I need help. And you're like, are you on medication? Yeah, but it has nothing to do with my depression. That's for anxiety. Right? Well, a lot of medications cause depression and or anxiety and or XYZ, all kinds of stuff. And so medications do matter. And sometimes it's the mixing of medication. I was fine until I started this one, and the symptom for this one isn't depression, so it doesn't make any sense. But this one over here I was taking before and I wasn't depressed. But now this new medication, every time you add something, it can switch everything up, right? And so knowing their medication and looking them up, and you say, how do you find it? It's simple. Just go to I used to use Google. I don't use Google. Now I use Grok, okay? AI. And I just type in side effects for whatever medication, right? And it'll just give you a list of every side effect right there, and you can kind of look at their medications and see really quickly what they have, or what the possible responses are. Are there any addictive problems in your family? Is there any history of mental illness? I asked that question that way because that was on the original PDI also, but it gives you an insight into their view of problems and also how they may excuse their own sinful desires and lusts based on, well, we have mental issues in my family and so forth. Any history of any of the following ailments? Addiction, cravings. Are you taking medication for psychological reasons? Do you have any problems sleeping? Sleep can be a huge thing. A lot of times, if someone's not sleeping, they can have all kinds of mental disturbances, okay, emotional disturbances. Sleep is a very important thing, and so if a person's not sleeping, it can really cause a problem. We're not going to deal with insomnia here, but it can be a really big issue. Does your present schedule allow for regular periods of rest and relaxation? Please explain. Have you ever been beaten or molested? Are you still being abused? Have you ever received counseling for this? Do you feel like the abuse you suffered is currently affecting you? This is a very, very big one, and we would deal with the emotional pain workbook here. Moral climate. This chart here is useful in this way. We really only look for extremes. Okay? Is it all the way to the right or all the way to the left? Overly permissive or overly strict? And what it does is this chart tells you their opinion of their parents' rules. Okay? And so if it's overly strict, and a lot of times when I counsel people that grew up in a Christian home, they'll put overly strict on everything. And it basically means I disagreed with the rule. Okay? So now I know an insight into their concept of the rules. And I might ask, what was the rule? What was overly strict about it? What does that mean, right? And so we'll get some insight there. Arrest issues there. Have you been or are you currently involved with pornography? Have you been or are you currently sexually promiscuous? Do you struggle with questions about your sexual identity? How would you describe your sexual orientation? Obvious reasons why all those questions are there. Okay? And that's going to be telling as we begin to ask questions. Your emotional condition. Which of the following are you currently struggling with? Here in this section, we're looking for things that go together, like confluence. Inferiority, inadequacy, doubts, insecurity, those are all connected, right? Headaches, dizziness, and these type of things, they might infer a physical problem versus a emotional problem with the soul. Blasphemous thoughts, lustful thoughts, obsessive thoughts might imply a spiritual warfare issue. You see what I'm talking about here? So connecting these, but don't ever jump to the conclusion, this is the issue. We're going to ask a lot of questions. This just gives us a starting point for asking questions. Which of the above listed emotions do you feel are sinful? Important question, because it tells you the one that they're probably struggling the most with. Sometimes they might put all of them, but often if they list just one, that's the most useful in diagnostics. And so you watch out for that. And why? Describe your emotional state right now. Would you consider yourself to be an optimist or pessimist, tendency to see the good in people and life or the bad? Do you find yourself being upset with others who do not feel or think or feel how you do? How often do you get angry? What most often makes you angry? Do you find yourself disappointed that others have broken your expectations? If so, how often do you feel this way? Would you say you have a short temper, or are you patient with others? Are you often anxious or fearful? Yes, how often, how do you normally respond? Are you often depressed or discouraged? Yes, how often and how do you normally respond? Are you bitter or holding a grudge about anything? Is there anyone you have unforgiveness toward right now? Do you find yourself thinking about your problems often? Do you consider yourself a victim? All of these are, just this stuff, you see the answers here, it really will help you clarify where they're struggling. Unforgiveness and bitterness and anger and anxiety or depression and that, it just clarifies things. Do you feel most of your problems are the result of your own decisions or because of what others have done? Now, a true victim will say others, right? So this is kind of a test question, to be honest. Who in particular? Who's at fault for all your problems? Do you often think about how things are? Do you often think about how things you hear from others or in the news relate to your problems? This question has to do with the idea of universal thinking, meaning a person who essentially everything that happens in the whole world is somehow affects them, right? It tells me the level of self-focus that they have, the level of vanity they have. Did you see about the flood down in Texas and the 100 people that died? I can't believe that happened to me. You're not there. You weren't impacted. Someone you know? No, but it's just, I'm so worried. It happened to me, right? And I feel like the audio went out again. I don't know why that happened to me. All right? Okay, so it's just this, self-absorption is kind of the idea here. Do you often use words like always, never, everyone, everything? This is extreme thinking, okay? And extreme thinking is where often the addictive personality traits are manifest, okay? They're extreme thinkers. Rank the following from 1 to 5 in order of your interest, 1 being the most interested, 2, 3, and 4 next in interest, and 5 being the least interested. I had to reword this question 4 different times before I started getting, I would have people put all 3s or all 2s. It's like 1 to 5 seems pretty simple, but people just like, I think those are all 4s, or something like that. Anyway, the point of this is to get a perspective, and this is actually most helpful in marriage counseling. Because if you have a person who is primarily focused on activities and you have another person that's primarily focused on ideas, it might give some insight into why there's conflict. It's like, well, this person they want to do stuff, and this person is more focused on just thinking about and, watching documentaries or something like that, and so it gives you some insight into that. But also, if their primary, and I have had people put number 1, self. That's pretty telling, right? I'm primarily interested in myself. I think about myself all the time. And I think about others too, what they think about me. Have you ever thought maybe you were going crazy? Do you fear? They used to say cracking up, but then I had too many people that didn't know what that meant. So times have changed. Do you find prayer difficult mentally? When attending church or other Christian ministries, do you plagued by foul thoughts? These three questions really give some insight into spiritual warfare and spiritual situation of the person. Have you ever been or are you currently suicidal? If you're currently suicidal, do you presently have a plan to commit suicide? If yes, what's your plan? Those are the three questions. Those two questions right there are three questions, are the questions that you would ask anyone who's suicidal. That's the first three questions you ask. Okay. Do you struggle with feelings of guilt? If yes, over what? Write out 12 words that best describe your emotional condition now. This is essentially an I am dynamic. It's another dynamic you'll see later on. Spiritual history. Do you believe in God? Do you pray to God? How often do you read the Bible? Were your parents or grandparents involved in any occultism? Do you consider yourself a religious person? If you were to die tonight, where would you spend eternity? Write out the... if you stood before God and He asked, by what right should I allow you in my presence? How would you answer Him? And I asked about salvation like literally 5 different ways. And the reason is because someone will answer the first 3 or 4 questions perfectly, and then we'll get to, do you have doubts? On a scale of 1 to 10, how sure are you? And they'll put like 7. Like, okay, there's a problem here. What are your doubts? Right? And they put down doubts. So it tells me a person can know how to answer the questions, and we're looking for consistency there. Are you enjoying fellowship with other believers? Are you under the authority of a local church? Do you have regular personal devotions? Do you have regular family devotions? Explain recent changes in your religious life, if any. Is there any other information concerning your religious life we should know? Present issues. Describe what brings you in for counseling. How have you responded in this situation? What could you have done differently in the situation? That's an important question, because it tells me whether or not they've actually considered if there's anything part they have in the problem. Is this something that they've tried to do, or that they've even considered what they might have done differently in this situation? What do you think brought you to this point? What do you think's behind all of it, right? What could be done on your part to fix the situation? Have you even considered what you need to do to fix it, or are you just hoping, someone will figure it out? These next 2 are backward. Sorry about that. Are you presently seeing about this situation other than me? I guess that one above needs to be taken out. I'll fix that. If yes, who? What have you done to personally try and resolve the issue other than seeking counsel? What do you want us to do? What are your expectations in coming here? Is there any other information we should know? Then, if you're seeking marriage counseling, answer the following. Rate your marriage on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best. Give details about what you perceive the marriage issue to be. Here's an interesting factoid. If a man fills this out and a woman fills this out, it's unlikely they'll have the same answer. Because he doesn't know what the problem is, and she has 12 answers. Right? She needs his sheet and her sheet and 3 other sheets. Right? What do you believe you need to do to fix this situation? What do you believe your spouse needs to do to fix this situation? I need to know where they are and where their spouse is on that concept. And what would you like your spouse to understand? That's a big question, particularly for the ladies. Okay, what is it they don't feel he understands? And where do you see the situation going from here? Okay, that's an important question because it's going to tell us. I'm pretty sure we're getting divorced. I've already filed, or something along those lines. By the way, a lot of men are blindsided by divorce. They did not know that was coming at all until it happens. It's pretty stunning how common that is. And then final information needed, are you in any type of litigation, such as child custody battles, divorce, abuse charges, or getting legal counsel with a lawyer? We ask that question because it's not uncommon for people who are in legal situations to be told by their lawyer, you need a character reference. Go start counseling with a pastor somewhere so that we can call him as a character reference. Okay? And I'm not a good character reference. I only know all the bad stuff you've done. Okay? And so before as a general rule, other than members of my church, I don't counsel with people that are in legal issues. Okay? Because I'm not going to go sit down there, and I don't want to be subpoenaed. And so I make sure that they understand that I'm never going to talk to you about all the things that someone else did. It would be hearsay for me to say it in court. All I can do is tell them about how horrible of a person you are. You do not want me as a character reference. It's true. Do you receive any financial help from any government agency? Are you willing to sign a release of information? And that's the rest of it. Okay. How many of you had seen the PDI from before? Quite a few of you. So this one's a fair bit different. Okay. But the goal here is to simplify getting more information up front for counseling purposes. In times past, if you don't know how, if you're not a natural question asker, it was difficult to get information, And so this kind of is intended to ask some questions that need to be asked for clarification, but also kind of get it all up front and ready to basically tee it up for counseling purposes, okay? And eliminate you needing to be able to read tea leaves, which is, the old one was a little bit that way, okay? Okay, so what do we do? When we're going to do counseling, they reach out to us and we say, before we schedule counseling, I'm going to send this paperwork to you. I need you to fill it out and send it back to me. Once I receive it, I can schedule counseling with you. Okay? I don't schedule counseling and then bring it to me as I start counseling. Because in some ways, I'm gauging their seriousness for counseling. Well, I have to fill out 13 pages? Seriously? I'm not doing that. Well, what then you think they're going to do what you tell them in counseling? They're not going to do it. So, we're finding out, are they really wanting to change? Is this serious enough yet that they really are willing to invest the time? Or are they just wanting to be able to say they went for help and it didn't work? Which is where a lot of people are. If that's the case, let them go somewhere else. Because if they're not serious about change, you're wasting your time. I don't mean to say it as if, my time's more valuable than everyone's. I'm just saying, I do have a lot of other people I could try and help that might be serious about getting help, right? And so, if they're not willing to fill them out. So that's the first thing. It kind of gauges my understanding of how serious they are. Secondly, it does give a lot of definition to what it is I'm going to be dealing with. And now I can prepare instead of having to have everything off the cuff. I've been counseling now for 23 years, okay? And a lot of things I can deal with on the spur of the moment because I've been doing it for 23 years, okay? But as a new counselor, that's not going to be the case. And I will tell you this, even after 23 years, if I know that the next session I need to deal with a certain thing, you know what I do? I go back and I look up my notes and I go over what I'm going to talk about. I prepare. It'd be silly of me not to prepare. I'd be doing a disservice to them. So the more information I can have and the more detailed that information, the more clear the picture becomes, it's better for them and it's better for me. to be able to be prepared for that process. When I get the PDI, the first thing I do is I read the entire PDI with a pen of a different color. Okay, so I don't read it with a black pen. I read it with a red pen or a purple pen or whatever I can find different color. I circle or mark areas of concern or interest. Okay, and I write notes. I might write a question out by it just in my first cursory walkthrough. And then I might go back and on the back side or on another page, I might write out 4 or 5 questions that I think I should ask about this here. In other words, my question asking is planned. It's not just off the cuff. It's not just, man, I hope I can ask good questions. I plan out what questions I need to ask to get clarity on that particular topic. And so I'll make my markup, I'll write out my questions, and then I schedule the counseling, okay? And someone says, I need to counsel right now. There's no such thing as emergency counseling unless it's suicide. And if it is that emergency, you're not the one to handle it. You need to send them to the hospital, okay? If it's that serious that they're going to kill themselves right now, they need to go to the hospital. I do counsel people regarding suicide. We counsel a lot of people regarding this issue, okay? So I know we have the answer for it. The problem is that we live in a culture that is very litigation focused. And if I get a phone call and they're like, Pastor, they're going to commit suicide right now if you don't come over. If they commit suicide and I haven't called the police and warned them that there's an imminent suicide, I could be liable. All right? So I do not do emergency suicide counsel. I will counsel them once they're stabilized. And what are they going to do? They're going to put them on medication. But you know what? They're going to save their life. I can't counsel people that are dead, right? I'll deal with the medication later. Let's save their life right now. And that's the important part, okay? And so, but beyond that moment right there, there's no such thing as emergency marriage counseling. We don't get in this week, we're going to get divorced. No, you won't. It takes longer to get a divorce than that. Right? Now, you say, well, what if they make up their mind this week that they won't get counsel? Then they made up their mind. I can't help people that already made up their mind. All right? In other words, take the weight off of your shoulders. You're not the Savior of the world. Jesus Christ is. Okay? And you've got to accept that. And so I'm not talking about wasting time. I'm not saying, I get it, sit on it for a few weeks or whatever. I'm just being honest. It takes time for them to fill it out. Take the proper time to evaluate it. Take the proper time to make notes on questions. And then schedule that counseling and make the schedule conducive to your schedule. And I'm not talking about making it hard for people to do counseling, but at the same time, sometimes we go so far out of our way for the counselee that it puts them in charge. And they can't be in charge in counseling. And I've had counselees that say, I want to meet at X time. And if they are really definitive about it, I say, I can't meet at that time. How about on Tuesday? In some way, I'm going to have some control over this. Okay? Because whoever's in control is going to determine the outcome. So they can't be in control. And there are times when people want to counsel, and they are control freaks, and they will cancel at the last minute and say, well, I can do it at this time, and I just don't do that. No, call me next week and I'll schedule again. I'm not going to be run in that way because I can't help someone that is a control freak if they're in control. All right? So there's just elements to that, and some of that's a learning process, all right? But just remember that our goal is to help people, but we have to be perceptive as to what their real problem is. And if I read their PDI and I know that the problem is that they're controlling, then I can't let them continue that activity with me. Okay, there has to be a modification and a change there. So there's aspects like that. So I'm going to make my markup. I'm going to schedule the appointment. When they come in, I have this in our first session. I have this out, right? And I have my questions. And I'm going to take notes. And you got to take notes. I do most of my notes now in a, and I'm not going to tell you what program I use. But it's a note-taking program. And the only reason I'm not telling you is because that way I can kind of protect my own notes a little more than, but there's lots of note-taking programs. Find one that works for you. You can do hard copies. I always did hard copies until I started traveling full-time, and now it just doesn't work to carry hard copies everywhere. And so I use a note-taking program, and I take my notes. I make notes in my note-taking program. What's in my notes? Well, I put in there the first thing. What are all the questions I was going to ask? And I'll type in the answers as I get them, right? Or I'll write them down, the answers as I get the answers. And then I will give a general response. How did they respond? And then I'll put down the drift of the session that way, okay? And then I'll put down what was the homework that was assigned, okay? And then I'll put down my goal for the next session. I want to do that while I'm still making my notes. That way, a week from now, when I've done 1,000 things or whatever, I don't forget where I wanted to go, right? So I can review my notes before my next session and say, okay, yeah, that's why I wanted to do this, and I know where I'm going, okay? And so keeping notes is a very important part. I want to tell you, my very first counseling experience was with a guy that was suicidal because Brother Mike is cruel. I was in the room where the sound system is now. And he was military. He had suicidal thoughts. He didn't have a plan. He just had suicidal thoughts. And I counseled 5 sessions with him about depression and various different things. And then he got transferred on TDY, and then they transferred him away, and that was it. I never had any more sessions. 2 years later, I get a phone call from NCIS. I thought that was just a TV show. But turns out it's a real thing, all right? NCIS called me, and this officer, and he said, we have in our notes that you counseled this serviceman for suicide and depression. I said, yes, sir. He said, we need your notes. And because he committed suicide. And so I had to send my 5 sessions to NCIS, my notes from that. And I got a message, a letter back from them, and from this guy, and he said, it's obvious to us that you did what you could to try and help him in the brief time you met with him. Thank you for the clarity in your notes. There is no way in this world I ever want NCIS to say something different, okay? And so keep notes. You do not know who might call you someday and what's going to happen, all right? So it's important that you keep good notes and you keep track of your notes, okay? This is your first note. Now, let me give a thought here, and then we're going to get into a little bit of another direction. But if you're taking this course for credit, you're going to get your certification. Part of that program is what we call practicum. Practicum means that you're going to have oversight for counseling for 50 different sessions, okay? And so online it says practicum. It's one of the classes or one of the places on the program online once you're logged in. I will tell you when to start counseling unless you're already a pastor who's counseling, okay? If you're already counseling, I'll help you earlier. If you're not pastoring and you're just taking for learning purposes, I'll probably start you a little later when you get through a few more of the classes, okay? Typically, I try and let someone get through about 5 classes before we start any counseling. That would be anthropology and the 4 life issues discipleship classes. And we cover a lot of dynamics, we cover this stuff, we get a lot of groundwork in these 5 classes, okay? Now, there's more to learn, but at that point, you have the basics, and sometimes the best way to retain things is to put them into practice. And so if you're practicing while you're going through it, it can be helpful. But the way you're going to do that is online, there's 15 counseling options, okay? So you just take number 1. You would take your PDI along with the notes that you have made on that. You turn it into a PDF and you upload it to counseling number 1. And then I will respond to you. I'll look at it. I'll look at your notes. I'll look at the PDI. I'll call you possibly if need be, or I'll send you my thoughts on things you need to evaluate and questions you need to ask. And then you're going to have your first session. In your first session, you're going to take notes on that first session. And then you're going to upload those to number 1A. That would be actual session. And there's 5 session options for each counselee and 15 possible counselees. The goal is 50 sessions. That technically would need only to be 10 counselees that you made at 5 sessions. I'm going to be very transparent with you. A lot of times when people first start counseling, they don't make it past the first session with a counselee. That's just normal, okay? But once you get some factors in, if we needed to add more, we'd add more or something like that. But the goal is to get 50 sessions where there's oversight and feedback on the process, okay? So this is part of the counseling training program, is that interaction that way. Now, I'm going to give one other thought on this. And I really, hadn't done this before, but I'm going to be starting this. And just because I feel like it's a good idea and a good practice. And I'll tell you why. But I'm going to start recording my sessions. And if you're going to record, you need to keep them. The person you're counseling needs to know that you record the sessions and why. Okay. Why am I going to record my sessions? Because, not because I'm worried about what might be said in the session. In that sense, I'm not. Okay, I've been counseling for a long time. I'm not worried about what we said. But because I miss things. And sometimes when you listen back to what people actually said, you go, oh, that's what they said versus what I thought they said. You know what I'm saying? And I was actually, this is a good book. I listened to a book because we were flying a lot lately, and someone had recommended the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Anyone ever read that? Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss? All right, you should. It's fascinating. He was the FBI kidnapping negotiator for years. And the book details all kinds of examples of negotiations, hostage negotiation. And as I'm listening to it, I thought, wow, there's so much correlation between counseling people and hostage negotiation. It's amazing. So it's not a Bible-based book. It's just interesting. It's intriguing. But one of the things he says in this book, and this gave me this thought, and Brother Hayes recorded sessions a lot of times. And I just never did. I thought Brother Hayes recorded sessions because he was old and forgetful. You know, that's what I thought. Because he never really talked. Did you ever hear him talk much about it? No, but he did. He recorded sessions. But in the book, it's interesting. It says this about negotiation, that the FBI, when they're doing a hostage negotiation, records everything that's said and has 4 or 5 different people listening to the recordings to see what they can pick up of details that the person engaged in the negotiation is missing. And I thought that was intriguing. And I certainly would never record sessions and let other people listen to them. but recording a session and listening to it myself before our next session is not a bad idea, okay? Because it'll help maybe pick up words and nuances. And we're going to talk a lot about this starting tomorrow, because tomorrow morning we're going to start going through the actual counseling process. And as part of that, we're going to get into a lot of details about buzzwords and about question asking and listening processes and all of that from a biblical perspective, okay? So I'm not talking about taking anything from that book by Chris Voss and applying it here to counseling in that sense. It's just something I picked up as I was listening to the book about the recording. I thought that's really a good idea. So, I would say this, all of any data that you gather, you need to keep confidential and protected, okay? So it should never go out from you. You need to be able to keep it confidential and protected. And you should never talk to your... At times, you do need, you go through things where you might be like, I need to get counsel about how to deal with this, okay? And that's where a network of people who counsel is a helpful thing, okay? That's where I could be a resource to you, okay? But you should never generally talk about things that you're dealing with in counseling, all right? And certainly never around your children, right? And preachers make a terrible error when they talk about people's problems around their family. Okay, so just really guard that. Don't do that. And even your spouse, there's things that I don't ever counsel women without my wife present, but there's things sometimes in counseling with men that I would never tell my wife. And it's not because I don't think she's capable, it's because there's things I've heard in counseling I do not want to repeat. You know? And it just needs to be kept that way. There has to be a level of confidentiality. And so if you record, you still need to keep a very strict confidentiality. One of the things I do, and this is pastoral, and this is where I was going now. One of the things I did when I was pastoring, because I pastored for 25 years, statistics are not great on pastors who counsel people in their church. Okay, just broad statistics. But part of that is because a lot of times what happens is we're dealing with a situation in counseling, and then we find a verse and we're like, I'm going to preach on that. And so we get up and preach on a topic that someone's dealing with in the church, and then they feel betrayed. So the way I dealt with that is I never preached except through series in my church. All right, I preached through books, and I never asked guest preachers to preach on a particular topic or something like that, unless there was a general theme, you know, something like that, but family conference or something. But you know, I avoided all the counseling. I've done a lot of counseling with people that I pastored, but we had very few people leave because of that counseling at all. But I really do believe that a significant part of that was that if a topic came up that I'd counseled someone with, they knew it was because it was the next passage in the Bible. It wasn't going out of my way to find it. But I'm not going to avoid passages. And I would tell them that, listen, I may preach on this topic, but I'm not going to talk about you, and I'm not going to point you out, right? But if it comes up in the scriptures, you know how I preach through books. And it just eliminated a lot of that. I know not everybody preaches that way, but if you're doing a lot of counseling in your church, I really recommend that you consider that type of a thing. And someone might say, well, but what if God tells me to preach X, Y, or Z on particular Sunday? Well, obey God, but just be aware that if you're always preaching randomly, you're likely to lose people that you've counseled, okay? Because they will start taking it as a personal affront, if you will, okay? All right, this is a lot of time, but we're at the end of our day, so we've got 15 minutes, and I wanted to give opportunity for questions before we break here. So we've covered things this morning. We've covered the PDI. We've talked about different things here. So questions that anyone might have, and we do want to use the microphones so that they're recorded. Okay.
You've obviously been counseling for quite a while, so my question was, when you were pastoring, was there ever anything that was brought up in counseling from a church member that you might need to share with your deacons? Is there ever something like that that ever happens?
Okay. Yeah. Yes. The answer is yes. But not often in that type of a counseling scenario. So I can't say it would never happen, but usually things that are to that extent are things that are revealed broadly, not necessarily in this confidential counseling environment. Okay. I'm trying to think. I'm not even I know it has happened at one point, but I can't even remember what the circumstance was. But how you deal with it, okay? What is the goal of counseling? What are we trying to do? We're trying to get them to walk in spiritual growth, right? Walking with the Lord. If you are talking about having to take it to the deacons, you're talking about an issue of church discipline now at this point. But the only reason we would get to an issue of church discipline is if there's a refusal to repent of sin. And so by that point, the counseling process actually has ended, and if they refuse to repent of sin. And we'll see that clearly tomorrow. I'll show you why that is. And so it's not like it's never happened where something was revealed and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I got to tell the deacons and short circuit the counseling. I've never had that happen now. I never had it happen. That doesn't mean it couldn't. I never had it happen that way. I have had counselees. Matter of fact, I have had counselees from other churches that I told, you have to go. If we're going to continue counseling, you have to go tell your pastor about this situation. Now, I am a mandatory report, and you are too. If you find out someone has violated a child, you do not have the option of confidentiality. You will go to jail. Right? So if it were something like that, confidentiality does not, the court and our government says there is no such thing as confidentiality with a pedophile. Okay. So that's not an issue. If the question is there was adultery or something, is there repentance? Are we willing to, I have to deal with that. As a pastor, though, if I have someone come, and I have had that happen where people committed adultery and we weren't in counseling when it came out, okay, but we're going to do counseling after the fact, okay, is more often what I've experienced. Like, okay, they want to get right. We need to do some counseling, marriage counseling about this situation. So it's more like counseling has resulted from situations like that more than counseling revealed situations like that. Does that make sense? I will say this. Recently, I have had some of the weirdest things I'd never experienced in counseling recently. I mean, I had to sit down and go, whew, I'm glad I never had to deal with that before, and hope I never have to again, kind of things. But Satan's real active. He's very active. So, all right, other questions? Yeah, sure.
Are there any particular safeguards that you would recommend putting in place if, I'm not sure if you do this or not, counseling young people under the age of 18?
I never counsel people under the age of 18 without parental permission. And Under many circumstances, I ask them if their parents can be in there, because often if they're children, the parents are involved in the problem, but the situation, and the parents need counsel in the situation also on how to deal with the situation. So it's not very frequently that I counsel kids without their parents present. And if I do, I also then would have my wife in with me. And so that would be what I do in regard to that. And I never, ever counsel a woman without my wife present. Does that answer that? Okay. All right.
Kind of a follow-up, you mentioned the statistical probability of losing church members due to counseling. Other than the obvious trying to correct it from the pulpit situation, is that probability still high because of shame of sin and things like that?
I don't know. Like I said, I never had that experience. Brother Hayes used to say it was 70% of the people pastor counsels will leave the church. I didn't have that experience.
And I'd heard maybe even a higher number than
Yeah,
that.
I did not have that experience. You? So there's a guy that went to school with me, and he hasn't had that experience either. So I don't know where he got that statistic, but I hear it. I've heard it a lot, and I've heard it from pastors. I counseled them, and they end up leaving the church. I'm just telling you what I experienced and how I operated. And the reason I did preach through books was because I didn't ever want people to feel like I was targeting them as I'm preaching and counseling.
I was going to say, I as a practice, don't do counseling. I obviously have to give counsel.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple come to me for counsel. Soon thereafter left, and I thought, well, was it because now I know their sin, and I really determined at that point that it was probably they were never really there anyway.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. They just their heart was never there in the church. They just
Yeah. I mean, there's maybe multitudes of reasons why someone might leave a church,
Sure.
obviously. And I've had my fair share of people leave church, and some because of sin, and some because of a lot of other reasons. But I can't look at any specific situation other than one where someone left the church after the counseling and it was a success. Most of the time, if I had people leave the church, it was because they didn't want counseling, not because they got it. If that makes sense. Like, I don't want to deal with this, and I'm not going to deal with this, and so I'm leaving. So it's kind of the opposite of the counseling side.
Now, you may cover this tomorrow, but this is kind of a follow-up on his question. If during counseling come to sin, that is, which is obviously a lot of the situation anyway, but you find a sin that needs to be dealt with within the church, there's no repentance, but it came out in counseling.
Uh-huh.
Is it still confidential, and how do you deal with that?
I am gonna cover that specifically tomorrow, so
I'll
I'm
let
not
you.
gonna answer that tonight because it's a longer answer. But I am specifically gonna cover that tomorrow. All right. Any other questions? All right. If you have to.
In dealing with suicidal situations,
Yeah.
like you say, to report it after being that we're Christians and we're men of God and we have the obligation to, are we obligated to follow up on them, or what's your advice on that? Like, if someone came to you specifically for help and it was about suicide and you reported it, are we obligated to follow up on
Well,
that?
I mean, I don't know about the word obligated in that sense. I think that if you care about people, you probably will. I don't know if there's an obligation per se, but it wouldn't be inappropriate, certainly. Yes.
So, when you counsel have your wife in,
Mhm.
would you discuss the issue with your wife?
If she's in the counseling, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk sometimes. When I haven't offended her, like I did today. But I want you to know, I told her I would buy her tacos to make up for it, and she said, okay. So we're all good now. Angela's a very good counselor, but she doesn't like to counsel. So
I'm an inmate chaplain, and I've had some correctional officers ask me to counsel with somebody or talk to someone that is suicidal.
Right.
Just put in a cell by themselves. Is that
yeah, I mean, if you have the opportunity to counsel with them and they're
because they don't have anything to be able to, for the most part, commit
Yeah.
suicide?
yes, yeah. I was going to make a joke about Jeffrey Epstein, but I won't. So the book "Do Thyself No Harm" is how I counsel with people that are dealing with suicidal thoughts. The first part of that book is on spiritual warfare, okay? Because I do believe a lot of suicidal thoughts are demonic lies, okay? So they need to close the access to that. But then the last half of the book is what I call the thieves of hope, and I took all the instances of suicide, of death wishes, and suicide attempts, and all that in the Bible, and broke it out into what is perceivable as motive in the different passages, and then I deal with each of those topics in the book.
And that book's out here.
That book's out there. Yes.
What was the name of it?
Do thyself no harm. All right? We good? Let's have, yep, go ahead.
Just for clarity, will you give your triggers to initiate a mandatory reporting?
Yeah, okay.
Because
So
there are certain triggers on it.
there are certain triggers, yeah. So, one, dealing with like suicide, if someone has a plan, I will report them. Because if they don't have a plan, they're not really serious. They just maybe they want attention. Maybe they are thinking about it, but they're not to the point where it's like imminent, right? So if they have a plan for suicide, I'm going to get a gun, I'm going to put it in my mouth, I'm going to shoot myself and kill whatever it is. I will immediately say, okay, we're going to call the police. I've told people I'm going to take you down to Norman and I'm going to take you to the psychiatric hospital, that type of stuff. Two, if there's a violation of a child, I deal with this. And by the way, this is partly, even if this isn't presently ongoing, if this comes out in counseling, part of repentance is a willingness to accept responsibility for my actions. Okay? Whatever that responsibility is. So if I'm dealing with someone who reveals that they molested a child, and even if that person's now over 18, I tell them, true repentance means you need to go turn yourself in. Now, if the child is under 18, I don't wait for them to do that. I turn them in, period. Okay? Physical abuse, sexual abuse of a child is mandatory report. Okay? You do have to be careful nowadays because now everything's abuse in the sense of like, well, my dad yelled at me. I don't call the police about dad yelled, but if there's physical marks where it's obvious abuse, or there's sexual abuse, and by the way, this is not just in confidential counseling. This is also just in church work. If you have a child that tells a bus worker that their uncle's sexually abusing them, you do have to report that. You do not have an option, and you should report it. By the way, too. You say, well, what if they quit coming to church? Really? That's the number is, save the kid, So those are the big triggers. If a woman is being physically abused, I report that. And I don't ask her permission. Now, she may not press charges. And they're probably not going to do much if she doesn't press charges. But I am not going to be culpable. And you say, well, what if she quits coming for counseling? I want her to know that her life is more important to me than whether she keeps coming for counseling. And yeah, I don't. That's not, those are the big areas. Okay. All right. Let's pray and let's go eat. And we're in the same building over there for dinner again. I think there's extra tables set up also out in the hallway as well. Brother Metzinger, would you lead us in a word of prayer, please?